I seem to spend my time thinking about metaphors quite a lot. It's an area of interest of mine. But what starts to happen with me, at least, well, apart from the fact I get so completely bored of the word metaphor, what starts to happen is that everything starts to look metaphorical, which is fine. But I think unless I can start to develop it's not exactly a taxonomy, but some kind of structure for what I mean by metaphor, to hold the various understandings of the term apart and to give it some kind of internal structure, it starts just to become meaningless. So I'm thinking about the different kinds of origins of metaphor, the different types of metaphor, and the relationships to other terms like metonymy or synecdoche or whatever. But the ones that I know about, and there's probably more, and these are coming from different sources, mostly from cognitive linguistics. Certainly people like Lakoff talk about an origin of metaphor that lies in what they call conflation, which is a repeated embodied association of one term within the metaphor with the other term. And they give the example of an increasing quantity, moreness, often being correlating with elevation in height. So, for example, if you put more liquid into a container, the level of the liquid goes up. Or if you pile sticks on the ground, the more sticks you pile, the higher the top of the pile goes. So there's an endless and very consistent correlation with more and up. And that eventually conflates into a metaphor where more becomes up. So we find that when we're talking about, prices. If you have to pay more for something, we say the price has gone up. Or if there are more people unemployed, you say the unemployment statistics, unemployment levels have gone up. So there's that kind of consistency. That's conflation. The other type I've been reading about recently, another one is one that Gilles Fauconnier talks about. He's great, Gilles Fauconnier. He did his fantastic book with Mark Turner called, I can't remember what it's called now, How Thinking Works, something like that. He's talking about conceptual blends anyway. But in this particular piece, he talks about what's called compression. And in compression what happens is quite complex chains or networks of activity are cognitively compressed. So that complex chain of action becomes very compressed with to a human scale, really. It compresses to a single human scale activity. And the example he gives is for example, something like foreign policy. If a politician working on foreign policy decides to reduce the level of aid to certain countries, an opposing politician may say that he is taking food out of the mouths of starving children. Now that phrase, taking the food out of starving children, he's clearly not doing that, but what's happened in that transformation is that this very complex series of foreign aid policies to do with how money is distributed, how that goes to help certain countries, how that money is distributed once it gets to those countries, how that may at the end of the line arrive at a food supply, and how that may or may not affect the lives of certain children. That very complex network of activities is compressed to this one phrase: he's taken them food out of the mouths of starving children, which is kind of a metaphor. At least Fauconnier talks about that as a kind of metaphor, or as a metonymic or a synecdochal phrase. So that's the second one. In addition to conflation, you've also got this idea of compression, which leads to metaphor. The third one, I don't know where this came from originally, but I heard Ramachandran, the neuroscientist, Vidyanya Ramachandran, talking about it. And this is where it happened, where you get a kind of cross-sensory modality transformation. So certain words, for example, or phrases, have a particular kind of rhythm or a set of utterances within them. Fricatives, for example, or plosive sounds, b and p, which has a kind of rhythm to it, which can correlate to the rhythms that you get if you trace a shape. And the famous example of that is you get two shapes, one of which is kind of jagged and one of which is more bulbous. And you ask people which of these two shapes is called Kiki and which of these two shapes is called Booba. and almost everyone says that the jagged shape is called kiki and the bulbous shape is called bubar, because you get this strange crossover in sensory modalities between the sounds and the way that your mouth articulates those sounds, and the shapes, which has got lots of changes of directions in the way that your mouth has lots of changes of shape when you're doing fricatives as opposed to plosives, or more rounded shapes and more rounded sounds. So that's the third one. So you got conflation, compression, and transformation in sensory modality. Ramachandran traces that to some kind of synesthetic effect, which I think is really interesting. What else have we got in terms of where metaphor comes from? That's all I can think of right now. I think there's a different set that feed into metonymy and synecdoche, but certainly those are three. I'll do for now, I think.